It is awesome to have you with us on a Friday night all across America on the Sports Map Radio Network, the Sports Map Radio app. I am Jason. Thank you, Chad Erickson, for the introduction. Austin is our producer back in Houston tonight, pushing all the buttons at Master Control. Our executive producer is Vladimir Louisant. We got a lot to do over the next 3 hours. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with regard to the Tua Tagovailoa injury. There are updates. There are new things coming out. Tua put out a statement today. Mike McDaniel spoke further on the matter, and everybody's just kind of taking a deep breath right now. I don't think anybody really knows what the future holds for Tua as it relates to when he'll actually return to action. But it's certainly a big topic of conversation. We'll talk about it. We'll follow Aaron Judge's quest for 62 home runs. He's had a few at-bats tonight against the Baltimore Orioles. We'll let you know what's going on in New York. That game is still happening as we speak. Yankees trail 2-1 to the Orioles as Baltimore trying to keep their faint playoff hopes alive. We'll also get into an interesting update in the Ime Udoka story. And I called this. I told all of you. This story is going to have a drip, drip, drip nature to it because the reality is the Boston Celtics decided not to rip the Band-Aid off. They're doing this slow peel right now on the Band-Aid as it relates to the Ime Udoka story. And you're getting drip, drip, drip of information. And every day you're getting a little bit more. And the picture's becoming clearer. And clearly people around the league know what's happening, but the Celtics don't want to say it. And this thing's just going to continue to kind of dribs and drabs of information. We're going to keep getting it. And we'll let you know what the latest development is. Matt Barnes made an interesting comment about the whole thing as well. We'll get into it as we go through the show tonight. Rachel Nichols has a new home, too. We'll tell you about that. Some fantasy football do's and don'ts for you this week with Jamie Eisenberg from CBSSports.com as well. Don't go anywhere, just getting started. Friday edition of The Cash In. I'm Jason Page. It's Sports Map Radio. Who you gonna call? Ghostbusters. What's going on, Austin? How are you? How's your week going? Good. It's just you and me for now. Just the two of us. We can make it if we try. Just the two of us. 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 You and I. 12 minutes after the hour. Good to have you along for the ride. Yankees trailing the Orioles 2-1. The biggest game of the night in baseball, though, really resides in the National League, where the Mets and the Braves are going at it in Atlanta right now. And it's is that game gone final? Is that game gone final? Maybe it has gone final. Mets were trailing 2-1 at last check. I didn't realize that game went final. Could that game have really gone final since we got on the air? Well, it is 3 hours in, so I guess it is. Top of the ninth, Atlanta 5, the Mets 2, and the Mets have the bases loaded with 2 outs. So there you go. Wow. What a wild one. Yeah, the Braves were able to get to Jacob deGrom early in this game. He didn't pitch terribly. 6 innings, 3 earned runs, but for Jacob deGrom in a big spot, that's not what you're expecting. That's not what you're, paying him and Max Scherzer all this crazy pitcher money for, right? I keep saying it all the time. Paying any pitcher these absurd contracts is just nuts to me for the number of games they'll actually be in during the course of a season. The amount you get in terms of productivity. I will say this until the cows come home, and I know I'm in the minority on it. It's fine. I can live with it. But a big 3-game series, and really the Braves need to win them all because they're down by a game. They're trailing in the season series 9-7. They really need to win all 3 games. Because if the Mets get 1, they get the season series. And then if they finish in a tie, the Mets win the National League East as a result, and that means they avoid the wild card round. So we'll let you know how it finishes up there. As I said, Yankees trailing 2-1 in the ninth. We'll keep you updated if Aaron Judge gets another at bat in that game as they actually go to the bottom of the ninth now in New York with the Yankees trailing the Orioles 2-1. So we've all had a chance to take a deep breath, right? We've all had a chance to exhale after the injury last night. We watched Tua Tagovailoa. We've seen all the reaction. I've heard neurologists today. I've heard former NFL players. I've heard current NFL head coaches. I've heard just about everybody talk about this story. And here's what I get after hearing all of these different people talk about this story. Everybody's questioning what happened on Sunday. Whether or not he was diagnosed properly for whatever occurred, back, neck, head, concussion, whatever you want to say, there was obviously some sort of issue that plagued him, right? And for him to go back out on the field when you literally watched him woozy trying to get off the field, no matter how you stack it up, something about that doesn't make sense. Now, does that mean, is there an equation that you take what happened on Sunday and what happened last night and you put them together? Is there anything that definitively links the two? No. There absolutely isn't. But sometimes there is such a thing as observational fact. And we all know what we saw with our own eyes on Sunday. And then the guy goes back there out on the field. And who knows what other damage could have been done while he was out there on Sunday. And then you get the end result with what took place on Thursday night. And the head coach of the Miami Dolphins was talking today. Mike McDaniels took to the mic, but what he said didn't make a heck of a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, otherwise we would have reported him having a head injury. I mean, that's why the NFL has these protocols, and there's not, like every single NFL game that is played, there's an independent specialist that specializes in the specialty of brain matter.
You know, and this is where I'm sorry. You know, this is lawyer speak. This is trying to get independent neurologist. How many times today have I heard independent neurologist? Independent neurologist. Independent neurologist. I almost heard that as many times today as I heard Bill Belichick say, day to day, throughout this entire week as it related to Mac Jones. And by the way, Mac Jones isn't starting this weekend. But here you get Mike McDaniel, who's a Yale grad. He's smarter than the rest of you. 2005 class of Yale, about 10 minutes from where I grew up, New Haven, Connecticut. But here's Mike McDaniel trying to tell y'all there's an independent neurologist out there, man. And everybody trying to absolve themselves by talking about independent neurologist, independent neurologist. You know what's funny? I haven't heard the name of this independent neurologist. I'm not saying he doesn't exist. I'm not saying he isn't real. I'm sure he's very real. But it's interesting. We haven't heard a single thing about the name of this independent neurologist. He's just independent neurologist. And nobody's brought this up. Everybody says that's the person that should be responsible. However, I have not heard the name of an independent neurologist so far. Wouldn't it seem that you'd want to have that independent neurologist come and speak out on what he saw on Sunday? What kind of tests they ran, how they came to the conclusion that, yes, Tua Tagovailoa was very capable of going back into the game after he could barely walk off the field and one of his teammates had to hold him up because he was falling down. Can we get the name of the independent neurologist? Because I haven't seen it anywhere.
So, for me, as long as I'm coaching here, if there's I'm not going to fudge that whole situation. If there's any sort of inclination that someone has a concussion, they go into concussion protocol, and it's very strict. If people don't vary or stray, we don't mess with that. Never have, and as long as I'm the head coach, that will never be an issue that you guys have to worry about.
Yeah. No. Well, it's obviously an issue we have to worry about, Mike. Based on what we saw on Sunday, based on what we saw last night, that looked like a guy that had 2 concussions in a span of 4 days. That's what that looked like. That's one thing everybody agrees on. It's one thing that everybody agrees on. Like I said, I want to see the independent neurologist should be out there on the podium answering questions, not the head coach of the Dolphins, because Mike McDaniel wasn't in a tent with Tua. Mike McDaniel wasn't in the locker room while Tua was being examined or in the tent while Tua was being examined. I want to hear from the independent neurologist. If the NFL was being transparent about this, if the Players Association was being transparent about this, because they're talking a good game, but remember, the Players Association, the NFL, they've all got this thing on lockdown. They have an agreement in how all this is operated in terms of the independent neurologist and how all these matters are handled and how they're adjudicated on the sideline when a player has a suspected head trauma. I've got a bad feeling that something's going to get sweat. And I'm not being, anybody who knows me knows, I'm the first person to yell at tinfoil guy with the tinfoil wrapped around his head. I'm the first person to mock that guy. But you cannot watch what happened on Sunday, watch what happened last night, hear the answers coming out of the Dolphins, which, by the way, thus far, according to all the reporting, the NFL is basically on board with what the Dolphins are spewing. And you get a Players Association that puts out sort of a half-hearted statement about we're going to get to the bottom of it. There's only one problem here for the Players Association. The guy you're trying to protect is also not helping you because he's saying he didn't have a concussion. He's saying his back locked up. So he's not helping your case if you're trying to make one. And that's because I suspect there isn't going to be a case made. Because for the NFL Players Association to do anything about this, they're going to have to go after Tua. And they're going to have to expose that Tua wasn't being exactly honest with what happened on Sunday. The only thing that changes the course of this is if the independent neurologist is brought out to answer for this and is fired. And he winds up being the fall guy because he didn't properly diagnose or missed the signs that Tua was suffering from a concussion. And there's one other thing about this that I want to get to coming up here in just a minute. There's one other big issue with regards to how this thing gets handled. I'll get to it in just a minute. 1-800-224-2004, 800-224-2004. Who's to blame? Is anybody to blame? Or do we just simply go on with our business and wait until the next hit, or wait until the first time a player dies 3 or 4 days after he has what we thought was a concussion, but it wasn't really diagnosed properly? I've said all along, the only way you're ever going to get change is the guy's going to have to either die on the field or die in a couple of days after he's on the field from a head injury. I'm not being macabre. I'm not hopeful for that. But the only way anything's going to change is if somebody dies. Because without that, there is no impetus for this league to change anything. The fans don't care enough. The guys with the TV rights having a guy almost die on the field, they don't care enough. The Players Association doesn't care enough. The owners don't care enough. The commissioner doesn't care enough. Heck, the player it happened to doesn't care enough. It's the reality. There's one other aspect of this that I want to get to, and we'll do that in a moment. 800-224-2004. Hit me up on Twitter as well if you want to send me your thoughts. I am at The Back Page. Hit me up on Twitter at The Back Page. I'm Jason Page. It's the Cash In from Sports Map Radio. Mm-hmm. Who? Okay. Okay, I'll get him on the other side. I'll handle the live interview at 10:40 on my end. Well, 10:40 my time, so 15 minutes. All right, coming up in 13 minutes, Jamie Eisenberg, CBSSports.com, fantasy football expert, stops by the show, help you get your lineup set for Week 4 in the NFL, the rest of Week 4 in the NFL. We're all about keeping you up to date on what's going on as it's happening. Tampa Bay trying to get a win closer to clinching a wild card spot. They lead the Astros 7-2, top of the 8th in Houston, and Houston just kind of playing out the string. They've already solidified their spot atop the American League as the number 1 seed for the postseason. Seattle crawling to the finish line, trying to get one of those 3 wild card spots. Toronto already has one locked up. Oakland and Seattle tied at 1, bottom of the 2nd in Seattle, and that obviously a game of consequence still. The Orioles won tonight, so they're not going to go quietly. By the way, the Orioles with the win tonight guarantee themselves a .500 season, well above their preseason win projection total. In that A's game at 1-1 in the bottom of the 2nd, Oakland plus 198 on the live money line on FanDuel, and Seattle at minus 250, in case you were interested. Kind of a weird late interleague matchup. Padres and White Sox going at it out at Petco Park. 1-0 Padres there in the top of the 3rd inning. All right, 800-224-2004, 800-224-2004. You can tweet at the show at the back page, but I gave you the number so you can call in as well. Dave is in Connecticut on the Cash In on Sports Map Radio. Dave, what's up? He came back on the field Sunday. See, yeah, it's kind of interesting though, but it's kind of interesting to me because I've heard. See, now you're saying it's a spinal cord injury that was why his fingers curled up like that. I've heard people say that posturing, it's called, that has to do with sort of a defense mechanism towards brain trauma. You know, that the brain stem. And so that's why I'm saying I'm hearing so many different accounts or versions of why his fingers curled up that way and why he sort of froze up and locked up that way. Now you're saying it's more the sign of spinal cord injury, and I'm hearing people say it's a brainstem injury. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's fair enough. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Well, that shouldn't, but that should have nothing to do. And I appreciate the call, Dave. I'm up against the time here. That should have nothing to do with it one way or another. This decision on Sunday should have had nothing to do with who's the backup. Whether it's Teddy Bridgewater, whether it's Tom Brady, whether it's the worst backup in the league, Brian Hoyer, I don't care who it is. It should have had nothing to do with who was backing up, because that means you're making decisions on people's lives and health based on football. So it should have nothing to do with that. But like I said, I keep hearing brainstem, that reaction, that locking up. I watched a neurologist on ESPN basically saying it was more brainstem than anything. That when you injure a very important part of the brain, that's how your body reacts. Now, there's been zero timetable given on a return to action for Tua Tagovailoa. Nobody's giving any sort of indication. But here's the other thing, and let me get on this while I have a couple more minutes before Jamie Eisenberg joins us. Here's the one aspect of this, and I've heard various players, current and former, talk about this, and it's players fudging it. Maybe they did all the correct tests on Sunday. Maybe the independent neurologist did everything he was supposed to. But maybe Tua Tagovailoa wasn't giving honest answers or honest feedback. Remember something. 4th year in the league for Tua Tagovailoa. A crucial year for Tua Tagovailoa. 5th year option around the corner. Team that has high expectations. Biggest game of the season so far against Buffalo. Maybe Tua just wasn't honest. And I think people on some level, and I've heard a couple of players, because nobody's trying to... I don't even like to use the word victim blaming here, because victim suggests that some perpetrator did something to put Tua in this position. The reality is Tua might be a victim of his own decisions as this thing starts to play out. That's another possibility, is that Tua was the one who perpetrated his own injury by not being honest with the independent neurologist. And again, I think so much could be answered if they had a press conference where this independent neurologist talked about what happened on Sunday. Why is this so difficult? That's what I want to know. Maybe Tua just didn't give honest answers. Maybe Tua's the one that has to get, I hate to say the word, thrown under the bus. I hope he's going to be all right. Time will tell. Day by day. To borrow a term from Bill Belichick. Jamie Eisenberg, CBSSports.com on fantasy football. All things related to that coming up in just a couple of minutes. I'm Jason Page. Glad to have you with us. It's the Cash In from Sports Map Radio and the Sports Map Radio app. All right, I got to get this guy on.
Sports talk, only better. The Cash In with Jason Page continues on the Sports Map Radio Network.
We continue on this Friday. 800-224-2004, 800-224-2004. Also on Twitter, at The Back Page. On Twitter, at The Back Page. We have, by the way, a huge announcement. Really cool announcement coming on Monday night. Our Monday night edition of the Cash In. We will have a very cool announcement to make. You're going to have to tune in for it. Very excited. Very excited. But you're going to have to listen. See, I know we've only been doing the show for a month, and we've already got big announcements that I can't tell you about until Monday. But we will do that, I promise. All right, a lot to do on this show. I said we'd do some fantasy football talk, and if we're going to do that, who better to bring in than Jamie Eisenberg, who I love talking with. CBSSports.com does a terrific job on all things NFL fantasy related. All right, Jamie, guide me through here in week number 4. I'm looking at some of the quarterbacks that are out there, looking at some guys that might be relatively fairly priced, some options if I don't want to go big and spend a ton. Give me some thoughts as it relates to Geno Smith on the road in Detroit. One of the sites I'm looking at right now has him at $5,400 for daily fantasy, and that to me sounds like a bargain.
It absolutely does. First off, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I think you look at a couple things here. First, the last 2 quarterbacks against Detroit have combined for 5 touchdown passes. So that's a good place to start. Especially when we talk about Carson Wentz and Kirk Cousins. Good quarterbacks, but not exactly the elite level guys. And so Geno Smith can have some production there just based on following suit. They just lost one of their key defensive backs. Tracy Walker's out for the season with a torn Achilles. So they're down a key member of their secondary. And, give Geno credit. He's actually played, better than expected. I think the two, surprises at the quarterback position just based on, the expectations of being absolute disasters. Geno Smith and Jacoby Brissett have been, fairly productive so far. And it's nice to see. So for this week, Geno, I think, is a great DFS play. I think Jacoby Brissett's actually pretty good DFS play against Atlanta. So you have some pivots there if you don't want to spend the money on guys like Josh Allen and, the like there for those high-end guys.
I noticed you mentioned Brissett. I noticed you mentioned Geno. You did not mention Matt Ryan going up against a 29th ranked defense. Is that because you think, what we saw late in that game last week against Kansas City from Ryan is an aberration? Or are you just not a believer yet?
Well, I don't know if I want to put Matt Ryan in the category of Geno Smith and Jacoby Brissett, from a player standpoint. Certainly from a fantasy standpoint, that's where he belongs. This feels like a get-right game for Jonathan Taylor. I think you'll see him be able to sort of, destroy this defense and not necessarily have to put a lot on Matt Ryan's plate. He's been struggling a little bit, and this offensive line hasn't played to the standards I think that they were hoping for. So, maybe take some pressure off of your, 38-year-old quarterback and not necessarily have to make him go out and win a game. The week 1 game that they lost, or tied, against the Texans felt like a loss. He threw 50 times in that game, got beat up a little bit in week 2 when he didn't have his receivers, and then had to do a lot of heavy lifting against the Chiefs. This feels like a game where they can lean on, what was last year at one point an MVP candidate, and Jonathan Taylor's gotten off to a slow start. You can sort of establish the run against the Titans. I think that's something that we see a little bit more this week. Jamie
Eisenberg, CBSSports.com, joining us on the show, talking some fantasy football. Does that mean you would be willing to pay up for Taylor this week, even at the hefty price?
I mean, when you think about where running backs are right now, there's a couple of options that have emerged because of injuries. Jamal Williams and Khalil Herbert being the top 2. That certainly fantasy managers could have added off the waiver wire at some point in the last couple of weeks, and even this week potentially in some 10-team leagues for redraft purposes. For DFS, they're going to be very popular. So it just depends on how you want to construct your roster. I think based on what we've seen from the running back position so far, it's been a largely disappointing season. But this feels like a get-right game for Taylor. So yes, I do have one lineup that I've already built where Taylor is the centerpiece, just because I think he's got the upside to sort of deliver on this hefty price tag.
David Montgomery's out. How do you feel about Khalil Herbert as his backup? And potentially if you're looking for a bargain at that position, going with Herbert.
Yeah, again, I think he's going to be sort of chalky, because I think everybody sort of realizes that the Giants' run defense not exactly the greatest. They're coming off of a short week, having played on Monday night. Leonard Williams not being there is huge for the Bears and their ability to run the ball, and that's what the Bears are going to do. They're going to run the ball. Herbert's got 5 games, including last week, where he's had at least 18 carries, and he's been successful in basically 3 of them, including last week's matchup. So based on what he did last week, his role in this offense and how this offense is going to utilize him, the fact that they're making no bones about it, they're not going to even try to throw the ball if they don't have to. So it's going to be a lot of Khalil Herbert, a lot of Saquon Barkley. If you like old school football, get ready to watch Bears-Giants this weekend.
Can you make an argument for Breece Hall against the Steelers?
I can. The big thing will be his role in the passing game, because Joe Flacco is certainly a little bit better for the running backs in that regard. Zach Wilson didn't really show that in the majority of his starts last year. He did a little bit toward the tail end of the season with guys like Ty Johnson, a little bit with Michael Carter. Breece Hall took over the lead in playing time last week, so hopefully that's a sign of things to come. This is a game the Jets can win. I don't think that they will, but they can. The Steelers' offense obviously isn't scaring a lot of people, and the Jets can certainly hang with them. If they don't have Zach Wilson sort of throw up all over himself, which is certainly possible in this first game, coming back from the knee injury, they can lean on the run game hopefully here, and maybe we get the first game, with some double-digit carries for Breece Hall and continue working the passing game. So I don't mind him this week at all.
I thought the Ravens' defense was going to be better than this. And, before the season started, I was under the impression this could actually be, a top 5 defense. And it just hasn't. I mean, it just hasn't performed to expectations, at least certainly not mine. With that thought in mind, I know they like to throw it around a lot, but is Devin Singletary somebody you'd look at for this weekend?
He's not awful. The question always
that's not very that's not very promising when somebody says, "Well, he's not awful."
There's a few things at play here. One, like you said, they like to throw the ball all over the place, and I think this is, coming off a game where they threw the ball 63 times, you could have the situation where Sean McDermott says, "Let's dial it back a little bit. This isn't Brian Daboll's offense anymore. Ken Dorsey, instead of throwing papers around, maybe throw a few more run plays out there." But he's been sharing time, with Zach Moss a little bit too much for my liking. James Cook, they worked in a little bit. The thing that was good about Singletary last week, because they throw the ball all over the place, they gave him 11 targets and 9 catches. So if he's able to do that, the big thing, like you said, about the Ravens defense is the back end of their defense, which was supposed to get healthy, hasn't happened. They still dealt with a lot of injuries, and they just lost Michael Pierce, who is arguably their best, interior run stopper. So with him not being there, maybe that's a situation where the Bills look at it and say, okay, let's try and establish the run and maybe take some pressure off of Josh Allen. But if Lamar Jackson gets going and this game gets to the level of, the 2 MVP candidates or 2 of the 3 MVP candidates when you factor in Jalen Hurts, we'd like to see those 2 quarterbacks making plays as opposed to Devin Singletary.
I know the Redskins' pass defense is among the worst in the league. Is it too soon for Michael Gallup?
I think it's too soon. So I think you look at just, how this game will probably unfold. The Commanders' offensive line is a disaster. Carson Wentz is struggling the last couple of weeks. And the thing that you saw last week for them against Philadelphia was they couldn't protect them. And so Dallas is coming off a game where they hit Daniel Jones 12 times. They sacked him 5 times. Carson Wentz just got sacked 7 times. So he's probably going to be under duress again. I think this is a game for Ezekiel Elliott and for Tony Pollard. There may be a shot player, too, to Michael Gallup, but I just don't think his playing time is going to be to the level that you like. So absolutely should be stashed. A decent contrarian play on DFS if you want to go that route, but it's probably going to be 1 or 2 catches that make his day. I just don't think he's going to get a lot of targets this week.
It's sort of middle of the pack in terms of price, but Amari Cooper in Atlanta?
I think he'll be a little popular just because, the Falcons defense has been a little forgiving to, opposing receivers so far this season, and he's coming off back-to-back 100-yard games, first time that he's actually done that since 2016. So he's playing at a very high level, going back to Jacoby Brissett. That's been the best part of Brissett is that he's kept, Amari Cooper at a very high clip. But, if you want to, trust him and just, hope that he's not as popular as maybe he could be, that's an absolute great play because the matchup I think is good.
Spending some time with Jamie Eisenberg, who joins us here on the Cash-In Sports Map Radio, the Sports Map Radio app, talking about fantasy do's and don'ts for Week 4 around the National Football League. We mentioned some guys that are potentially bargains, and I'm trying to find those middle tier or lower tier guys that might be able to jump up and do some things. With that being said, Darren Waller at 5,600 on one of the sites I was looking at today against a 25th ranked Vegas defense. I know the passing game has been a source of concern when you talk about Denver and Russell Wilson. I know the late drive last week gave some people some hope that maybe it clicks after that. Do you go near anybody wearing a Buffalo jersey if they're catching football, or rather a Denver jersey if they're catching footballs?
Yeah, I think this is actually going to be a good game for Russell Wilson. Like you said, I think they sort of found something a little bit at the end of the game. You kind of look at the way that the season's unfolded for them. The game against Seattle, he's a touchdown away from having a big game. 340 passing yards and one touchdown. If he gets the second touchdown, I don't think anybody's concerned. The game against Houston was a little troubling, but we might find out that this Texans defense may be a little bit better than we expected. And then facing the 49ers, tough matchup, across the board. So it's just I think a little frustrating how things have unfolded with the red zone opportunities that have failed. But I think he's just a play away from connecting with a big game with Cortland Sutton. Jerry Jeudy, I don't know how healthy he was last week. It wasn't on the injury report this week, so hopefully he's 100%. So getting those two guys back together should be fun. This Raiders defense has been just very forgiving to a lot of opposing quarterbacks so far. So I think it's an opportunity here for him to take advantage of it. I hope he does. So, if you want to go the contrarian route, because a lot of people are just afraid of Russell Wilson, I think he's a good play. He's in a couple of my lineups this week.
David Njoku is $3,700. And I know, look, I loved this guy from the moment he got drafted, and there are weeks where, he absolutely disappears, and then there's weeks like last week against Pittsburgh where he's got 9 catches, 89 yards, he's being targeted a ton. Again, going up against Atlanta, which isn't very good defensively, Njoku at that price just feels like somebody you have to be. Again, if you want to pay up for a top flight quarterback or a Jonathan Taylor, and you want to save some money, is Njoku a guy you like?
I think so. It's kind of been a slow build for him because it was a really disappointing week 1. I think it was 1 target.
Yes.
Then he had 5 targets in week 2, and then the explosive game last week with 10 targets, like you said, 9 catches. And so was it just a matter of Jacoby Brissett feeling a little bit more comfortable with him? Was it a matter of them kind of figuring out, okay, what can actually work here? Kevin Stefanski realizing, okay, this is what Brissett does well, and let's lean on that. And maybe it was just a matchup against Pittsburgh, but it's another good matchup against, a Falcons defense that has struggled against tight ends. They had, if you just read stat lines and box scores, Taysom Hill had a big game against them, but he did it on the ground. But the last 2 tight ends against Atlanta have had some, successful performances. And so from Tyler Higbee to, Will Dissly last week, those guys have had, good numbers against the defense. So I think it is worth it, certainly at the price tag. But again, I think it'll be somewhat popular as people sort of go the route that you're explaining, finding, a little bit pricey quarterback and running back, and then trying to find a tight end that has some success. Njoku would absolutely be one of those guys in that category.
Consider yourself informed, folks. Jamie Eisenberg has spoken. CBSSports.com does a great job on fantasy football. Always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Have a great week 4.
Appreciate it. You too.
Jamie Eisenberg giving us some time on the show today. I love Njoku. And can I actually tell you something interesting? This is going to be the first week that I've done fantasy football. I don't like to do DFS over the first few weeks of the season. And here's why. It's too unpredictable. And Njoku is the embodiment of that unpredictability. Because in week 1, he's got 1 target, and in week 3, he's got 10. And I think he might get that many this week, too, in Atlanta. I love David Njoku. I shouldn't tell all of you that, because if you wind up getting into the same DFS contest I'm in, it's gonna wind up hurting my chances. So stay away from him. Don't bother. Stay away from him. Hey, producer Austin, do you do daily fantasy? Oh God, you're crazy. I can't do the season long stuff anymore. It's too long. I can't keep my attention that long. Week to week, if I suck one week, next week's a brand new life. It's like being born again. It's like Groundhog Day. You get a chance to do it all over again. All right, 800-224-2004, 800-224-2004. You got a fantasy starter that you like for this week? Let me know. 800-224-2004 on Twitter at The Back Page. I am Jason Page. It's The Cash In on Sports Map Radio. So for the podcast, FYI. Do 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 do. Here's the key to winning, though, on this show. You have to follow me on Twitter. That's the catch. Nothing crazy. You have to go and follow me on Twitter. Send me a note. Say hello. And you're entered to win on our Wednesday giveaways. Simple as that. Just say hello on Twitter and follow me at the back page. Again, on Twitter, at the back page. You can call us 800-224-2004, 800-224-2004. That's another way to get in touch with the program. Always love to hear from you guys. Again, big announcement coming on Monday night. You'll want to be listening in. Kind of cool. We'll share that with you on Monday night. Some big news here on the program. And don't worry, nothing bad. I'm not like announcing my departure or anything like that. Next hour, should Tua be done for the season? I'll tell you what one concussion expert is saying. We'll get to that in the next hour. And what does the future hold for Ime Udoka, the head coach of the Boston Celtics, who's been suspended for this season? And frankly, they say he's suspended, but he may not even be back from that, if you believe what some people are saying. There's some interesting news involving the Ime Udoka controversy, and we'll tell you what it is coming up in a couple of minutes. I'm Jason Page. Hour number 1 of the Cash in the books on Sports Map Radio and the Sports Map Radio app. Making me nervous. Ah, boy. Let's go. Another hour starts right now on Sports Map Radio, the Sports Map Radio app. Can you believe we're finishing our first month doing the show already? Is that possible? Could that be? It just feels like it's gone by too fast. Is it really the first month? I have to actually look. Is it actually the first month? I'm making sure on my calendar that I'm not reading it wrong. No, this is actually the 4 weeks that we've been doing this show already. That is absolutely bonkers. It's amazing how quickly. I've always said when I'm hosting shows, the time just flies. And I'm not talking about the show itself, which goes by fast, but just the actual days. Because I'm on a clock Monday through Friday. Start prepping the show at this time, host the show, post show, everything I do. It flies by. Thanks to everybody at Sports Map Radio, Craig Larson, the program director, David Gow, the owner of Sports Map Radio. We decided to do this only about a month before we launched, and everything came together really fast in order for us to get on the air in time for football season, and I could not be happier. So thank you to everybody at Sports Map Radio for indulging in this fine experience. A lot to do in this hour of the show. Should Tua be done for the season with what transpired on Sunday and then what transpired on Thursday night? Should there be any doubt as to whether or not he plays again this season? One guy says he shouldn't play the rest of the season. He's somebody whose opinion should matter in this. He's an expert on concussions, and you'll have to hear what he's saying coming up in about 17 minutes. It's worth it, trust me. Rachel Nichols has a new home. Remember her from ESPN? Tell you where she's going. We'll have the latest on the Ime Udoka controversy. More drib drabs of information. We'll tell you what it's all about as we continue. On the Cash In, I'm Jason Page. Glad to have you with us. Sports Map Radio. And on the Sports Map Radio app. He's on the call, Dr. Feelgood. He's the one that makes me feel all right. Up 3 solo home runs. We march along on this Friday night. I like this. This is heavy. I just saw that. It's funny. I was walking the streets of Palm Springs last night. After I do the show, I sometimes take my dog downtown and walk him around. And some nights it's hopping down there because you get all the tourists that come in on the weekends. Thursday night's one of the busier nights downtown because there's a street fair and all this stuff that close off downtown. And as I was walking last night, I saw a sign had just been put up downtown. We have this theater that's like a zillion years old. It's like a historic landmark. And the sign said, Alice Cooper's rocking the plaza. And I was like, wow, that's pretty wild. Yes, that Alice Cooper is going to be performing here in downtown Palm Springs in, I want to say, early November. And when I think of Palm Springs, California, Alice Cooper is not usually the first thing that comes to mind. I can't imagine all the senior citizens living here awakening from their slumber to go see Alice Cooper. I mean, really? I mean, go look at what the average age in Palm Springs is, like the median age. And then you're like, really? Is that the Alice Cooper crowd? Maybe it is. I mean, he's pretty old himself now. So maybe they're coming out to support one of their own. I don't know. 13 minutes past the hour. Sports Map Radio, the Sports Map Radio app. By the way, the Mets wound up losing. Yankees lost 2-1 to the Orioles, so the Orioles keep their faint playoff hopes alive. The Mets lose to the Braves 5-2. Jacob deGrom giving up 3 solo home runs in that game. The Mets and Braves now tied atop the National League East, but the Mets have a 9-8 series lead, I believe, for the season. So the Braves basically have to win both games in order to avoid losing in a tiebreaker scenario. Because there are no more playoff games if you tie for the division. They just take best head-to-head record against each other if you're tied. And if the Mets win one of these remaining 2 games, at the very least, they'll leave tied with the Braves, and they'd have the season series. So they'd have the better season record between the 2 teams. So there are still a lot of ways the Mets can win this division. But if it's the Mets and there's a way they can lose the division, they'll figure out a way to lose the division because they are experts at breaking the hearts of their own fans. Seattle and Oakland are tied at 1. The Rays and Jays have now punched their ticket for a wild card spot. So there's 1 wild card spot left in the American League. The Mariners have a shot at it. They're obviously in the driver's seat, 6 games clear of the Orioles on the loss side. So Seattle's just about in. Matter of fact, if they win tonight, maybe they'll actually be in. I haven't looked if that's the number that matters. All right. The magic number's 1. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Austin. So their magic number is 1. So if the Mariners win tonight, they're in. 1-1, bottom of the 5th in Seattle, and it's been like 20 years since they were in the playoffs. Something like that. Might even be longer. So let's talk about Ime Udoka and the latest update on what this investigation. And look, the Celtics could have just put all of this out there a week and a half ago, and we'd be moving on to talking about something else. We certainly still wouldn't be talking about Ime Udoka. But the Celtics insist on doing this the hard way. And the hard way is keeping it all close to the chest, not wanting to reveal any information. Nobody's saying they have to reveal who the female that he was involved with was, although I still do wonder if he's being suspended for a year for an inappropriate relationship with somebody in the organization. Is the woman being, is she being punished? I don't know. Nobody seems to know. But the story tonight from Adrian Wojnarowski over at ESPN is that the independent law firm that was tasked with, finding out what happened between Udoka and a female subordinate. So now we know it's a female subordinate, somebody that reports to him. And apparently it's crude language in his dialogue with this subordinate prior to the start of an improper workplace relationship. That is what's factoring into the severity, that being the 1-year suspension and the fact that, he's basically been benched for this year, and there's a chance he never comes back. That is apparently the reason why the organization decided to suspend him for 1 year. And like I said, there's every reason to believe he won't be back with the team. Now, nobody is saying what that verbiage was, but guess what? I've got a hunch that we're going to find out at some point. And again, you could either rip the Band-Aid off, a la Steve Carell and 40-Year-Old Virgin. Just rip the tape off. Kelly Clarkson! Just rip it off. Or you can do this slow, painful peel. As painful as the sound of my voice right now. This painful, agonizing peel in which your team gets dragged around in the press, your organization gets dragged around in the press, and everything but the basketball is what we'll be talking about. Those investigators describing verbiage on Udoka's part that was deemed especially concerning coming from a workplace superior, that's the words of Adrian Wojnarowski, contribute to what is likely a difficult pathway back to his reinstatement as Celtics coach in 2023. Now, here's the next question, okay? Why haven't you decided whether or not you're keeping this guy or not? You have the investigation finished. You have all your evidence. Make a decision. Again, why are you letting this linger over the organization, a team that is right now the favorite in Las Vegas to win the NBA title? Why are you doing this? Why are you absolutely hindering yourself? I don't understand it. By the way, I wouldn't put your money on the Celtics. If somebody handed me a briefcase of cash right now and said, put it on one team to win the NBA championship, I wouldn't put it on the Celtics anyway. By the way, they picked up Blake Griffin too. I'm not putting my money on the Celtics anyway. But still, they're obviously a top 4 or 5 team when you talk about who has a chance to win an NBA title this year. Why is this organization handling this way? And I don't hear enough people asking that question. The power dynamic, Wojnarowski writes, associated with a superior's improper relationship with a staff member was the primary finding and policy violation cited in the law firm's report, which was commissioned by the Celtics and completed early last week. I have to have a feeling, And maybe part of this is they want to see how it works out in terms of their interim head coach, Joe Mazzulla. Maybe if Mazzulla sucks, they decide they want to hold out and wait and try Udoka. But if Mazzulla's coaching well, maybe that makes it easier for the organization to part ways with Udoka. That shouldn't be the reason. That shouldn't be the way they're making this decision. But I can't think of another reason why, if what he did is so egregious in their eyes, and all the investigating has revealed this, and I'm sure they've probably got cell phone records and text messages and all of this stuff. And by the way, if Udoka was dumb enough, if he was stupid enough in this day and age, and we're not talking about somebody in their 40s or 50s or 60s who will try and use the excuse of, well, that's the way we used to talk. If in this day and age, a 30-something head coach, hey Google, how old is Ime Udoka? Let's see.
Sorry, I don't have any information.
Thanks. Way to help me out there, Google. I mean, I assume he's in his late 30s, right? Because he recently retired from his playing days. I mean, you're talking about a guy in his 30s. If you, in this day and age, this woke culture, this Me Too world that we live in, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, by the way, but if in that day and age, you're dumb enough within the last year to go and put things down in a text message to a female subordinate that could be deemed cringeworthy, you kind of deserve to lose your opportunity. And it's your first head coaching job. You don't have the gravitas to get away with that sort of thing. I mean, if Greg Popovich did something like that, and not that he ever would, but if Greg Popovich or Steve Kerr did something like that, they might have a shot at outlasting the outrage. You're Ime Udoka. You're one season in. You went to a finals and lost. Who do you think you are? That you can, and again, it just goes to show sometimes the arrogance of the modern day professional athlete, professional coach, somebody in that position. But if all of that is true, and everything I've just outlined is a correct thinking, why is this guy still employed? What's the team waiting for? If you know, tell me. 1-800-224-2004, 800-224-2004. You can tweet at the show, at the back page. Again, I'm on Twitter, at the back page. You got a thought on it? What would you do with the Celtics if you were Ime Udoka? Knowing everything we do know. And again, the story is becoming clearer by the day. We can continue to talk about it. Should Tua Tagovailoa be done for the season? What one concussion expert is saying. That's next. I'm Jason Page. It's the Cash In from Sports Map Radio. Okay. You two have fun. Okay. On and on and on and on and let the beat, let the music take control. The beat goes running up and down. We're about halfway home on this Friday edition of the Cash In, Sports Map Radio and the Sports Map Radio app. If you're not following me on Twitter at the back page, do it now. Every Wednesday on the show, we give away a cool prize. Simple as that. Just follow me on Twitter at the back page. Send me a note saying hello. Say you're new follower. And you might be one of the winners. We pick them every Wednesday. Matter of fact, I got 3 boxes here I got to send out. Not going to lie, I've been a little busy lately. So I do have some boxes to send out. So if you're one of our winners over the last few weeks, don't worry. You got a box coming your way. A nice little package coming your way. We were talking about the Ime Udoka situation and him being suspended. And again, I can't figure out for the life of me why the team hasn't made a decision as to his future. I mean, if you're gonna get rid of him at this point, you have all the information. If what's being reported is true, and I have no reason to doubt Adrian Wojnarowski, then I don't really understand for the life of me why he's still the head coach, even if he's suspended for a year, indefinitely, whatever it may be. Just move on so he could start rehabbing his life, his career. This woman can move on with her life. I don't know if they're even still in a relationship. I have no idea. Nobody knows. So anyway, we'll get into that as more details come out. And there will be more details that come out. I can promise you that. I told you a week ago that this was going to be a drip, drip, drip. And I've been right. So you can expect more news on this to come. Should Tua Tagovailoa be done for the season? That's one of the questions that is being put out there these days. What should the Dolphins organization do? And obviously it's going to be on some level based on the medical data, which is now going to be far more scrutinized than it was previously. But there is one person with a real history and understanding of concussions that's already making his opinion known. You might remember Chris Nowinski. We mentioned him on the show last night. He's a former WWF wrestler. He's a former wrestler who also played football. He's co-founder and CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. His opinion? Tua Tagovailoa should never play again this season. Simple as that. He's saying Tua should not get back out on the field. Now, what is making him say that? He's got his reasons. I mean, he's a guy that obviously knows a lot about this. And he says, quote, "There's almost no doubt he's had 2 concussions now 4 days apart, which can be career-ending," Nowinski told Deadspin Friday morning by phone while participating in the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's Forum on Traumatic Brain Injury, which is being held in Washington, D.C. Quote, 3 concussions in a season is rolling the dice with his future. If it was me, knowing what I've been through and knowing how young and promising he is, he's not back on the field this season. The Dolphins screwed up, and unfortunately, Tua is the one that's going to be punished somehow. Now, see, the area, and I've said this before, where I disagree with Chris Nowinski is if Tua's a party to this. And we don't know. We don't know if Tua Tagovailoa is in on it. And by that I mean, did he A, fake being okay? And again, I listened to David Pollack today on ESPN say the same exact thing that I'm talking about right now. Players sometimes will pretend that they're okay just so they can pass these sorts of examinations for brain trauma, because the stakes for them are so high. I mean, think about this for a second. Let's say Tua comes out with a concussion on Sunday. Let's just game this out for a second. Tua comes out with a concussion on Sunday. Teddy Bridgewater steps in, leads the Dolphins to a victory over arguably one of the best teams in the NFL in Buffalo. Then Tua doesn't start on Thursday. Teddy wins again, which we don't know if it would have happened in Cincinnati or not. But let's just say, wins again. Now all of a sudden, he's playing well. He's a guy that's been a capable starter in this league before, has led a team to the postseason, and all of a sudden, people are second-guessing whether or not Tua Tagovailoa is the guy to lead this team forward. We've seen players lose their job to injury before. We've seen it plenty of times in this league. We always hear coaches say, oh, no, guy doesn't lose his job to injury. But let's be honest, it happens all the time. Guy gets hurt. Go ask Tony Romo. It's happened plenty in this league. In this league of all leagues, it happens probably more than any. And Tua's thinking that when he's in a tent or in the locker room being examined, you'd fake it too. And I said this when I talked about Justin Herbert a couple of weeks ago with his rib injury. I talked about it again on Monday after they left Herbert in a 38-10 blowout when they have no chance of coming back and he's playing with torn cartilage in his ribs. I talked about it then. And what did I say? There's got to be a grown-up in the room. And this, again, comes down to having a young head coach who's still wet behind the ears. And, he's so buddy-buddy, and he's a player's coach. Is that the guy that's going to look out for the players, though? Mike McDaniel could get up at a podium and say any damn thing he wants. It's actions that speak louder than words. And in this case, the actions do not show me a man that gave a crap about Tua Tagovailoa. Because he saw the same thing we all did, and he still had him out there on Sunday, and he had him out there on Thursday night. And if his care is that deep, if it runs that deep, and all he's done today is wax poetic and talk last night, that's not the kind of guy I am, well, your actions tell me otherwise. I don't think he has any malice. I don't think he's trying to hurt Tua. That's not what I'm saying. But you can't get up on a podium and pound the podium and insist you're looking out for player safety when everything I've just seen over the last 5 days tells me you're not. As bad as everything that's happened in this story is over the last 5 days, what happens next is just as important. I'm Jason Page. You're listening to The Cash In on Sports Map Radio and the Sports Map Radio app. We got more to do. Stay with us. this song. I am Jason Page. Glad to have you with us on this Friday night. Next hour, we'll get into something that it's a bit morose. It is a bit of a downer, but I think it illustrates why this Tua Tagovailoa story is so important and why if we in the media don't talk about it, the NFL would just assume it go away. And that's what they're going to try to do. And I think people have to be steadfast in their convictions of the importance of player safety, not just talk it, but show it. And that's why for at least one segment in each hour tonight, I put it in the show. Because people tune in at different times. They tune out at different times. They're in and they're out. Hopefully you're listening for all 3 hours, but I'm not stupid. I'm not crazy enough to think that most people listen for the entire 3 hours. But with new people coming in and out, I think it's important to have different times in the hour where we talk about this because it is the biggest story to me as far as the NFL is concerned for week 4. And the rest of the games haven't even been played yet, and this is already going to be the biggest story of week 4. So we'll get into it in the next hour as well. We'll also talk about some college football. 2 good games this weekend that you should be watching. I will talk about those. And there's another story that's just kind of under the radar right now. And maybe it's because NHL preseason isn't all that exciting. And maybe it's because it involves a team north of the border. But it's a really disturbing story potentially for the league. And we'll get into it coming up in the next hour. Also, for once, I agree with Kurt Schilling. Yeah, if that isn't a tease worth making you want to listen in the next hour, nothing will. Rachel Nichols. Remember Rachel Nichols? Well, she's got a job. She got hired by Showtime. Now, you'll recall she got into hot water with ESPN last year. And she left after being involved in this controversial story. An article appeared in the New York Times. Newspaper obtained a recording of a phone call between Nichols and Adam Mendelson, a longtime advisor of LeBron James. Nichols was in the bubble at the time covering the NBA at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. In that conversation, she praised his coworker Maria Taylor, but also questioned her position at the network because of its record with diversity hires. Basically saying she was an EOE hire. That's essentially what Rachel Nichols was giving you. And in announcing that she was going to work for Showtime, she was on the All That Smoke podcast. Great name for a podcast, by the way. And in that podcast, she discussed what went on behind the scenes that led to her leaving ESPN. She said, quote, around that same time, I got a phone call asking me, would I step aside for Maria to host the NBA Finals and have me go back to being a sideline reporter? They stressed it was my choice, she says. They weren't telling me to do this because it was in my contract, but they were putting a lot of pressure on me. I was being told, well, you're not a team player, which any woman in business knows is code, right? Women are supposed to be kumbaya and team players and helpful. And men are aggressive sharks and all that, Nichols said. She said, quote, I just felt like, hey, I worked so long, decades for this job. I have done everything that was asked. We put on some great shows leading up to the playoffs, and I wanted a chance to do it. So she didn't give in. With Showtime, which I was kind of surprised to hear she was going to Showtime, where she's going to work on content as a producer and a host. The network said she'll be on the basketball vertical and contribute to multiple programs and projects from Showtime basketball across multiple platforms. I didn't even know there was such a thing as Showtime basketball. I'm excited to hear it. Anything that brings more coverage to the NBA, I'm all about it. Sign me up. So that's what's going on as far as Rachel Nichols is concerned. Be interesting to see what she does over there. You know, it's interesting. You look at... You know, there's always so much turnover. Everything there's these cycles where you've got this star and that star. And it's why certain people, it's kind of also why radio has this hold on some people. You look at the people that have been on the main big names on sports radio: Colin Cowherd, Dan Patrick, Lebitard to some extent, but he's kind of gone off of the radio now. He's doing his own thing with Meadowlark. You look at some of the people that work in this business: Jim Rome. Now, I mean, that's about it. Rome, Colin Cowherd, and Dan Patrick. Those are the three big nationally syndicated sports radio shows. And why? Because TV, there's so much flippage. There's so much turnover. You're hot for 2 or 3 years, and then it's on to the next thing. Now, I look at my buddy Michelle Beadle. Had her run with ESPN. Then she went to NBC. It didn't go well. Then she went back to ESPN, had another good run. Then something happens, and she winds up not there anymore. Now she's, doing 17 different things to account, for the audience that she got on one thing before. This happens all the time in this industry where you're huge for 2 or 3 years. Television is so much different. Video now with streaming and all these different options. There's just so many places you can go to evangelize whatever it is you want to talk about. Radio, for a lot of the big names, it's the safe place. Because unless Colin Cowherd goes on and, makes fun of the Queen dying, or Dan Patrick goes on the air and says something completely fabricated about the commissioner of the NBA or NFL, or if Jim Rome goes on the air and says something completely out of bounds, and says he wants to, attack the president of the United States. I mean, those guys are untouchable in that industry. In TV, all it takes is one little slip up, and they're on to the next thing because there's so many people that can do it. Radio, not everybody can do this, especially the solo show. I'm not a huge Jim Rome guy, but the guy's been doing a show by himself for a zillion years, and people still listen. I don't know why, but they do. And you know what? All the power to him. Chris Russo on satellite radio, been doing it forever. He made the successful transition from New York sports radio host to nationally. And now look at him. He's blowing up on TV. MLB Network. He's on First Take with Stephen A. Smith, the two of them, the oddest of odd couples. But hey, it works. And doing a daily radio show on top of all of it on Sirius XM. Because there is a safety in, if you're good and you can be consistent, say something outlandish every once in a while, there's a safe place for you in radio. It's in television. You can say things on radio. Let's just be honest about it. There are certain things you can say on radio. You can't say them on TV. You just can't. And I don't know why that is, but there are certain things you can get away with saying on the radio that you can't say on TV. Dan Dakich is a host in Indianapolis. I know this is way far afield, but in a little inside baseball, but I don't mind talking about it. It's 11:49 p.m. on a Friday night if you're on the East Coast. Dan Dakich has said a million things that in TV, he'd get canned in 5 minutes. Same on the radio, you can get away with it. You'll have some big corporate radio conglomerate that'll just back you up. As long as the sponsors are there, they don't care. Television is a lot more touchy in that regard. You rub somebody the wrong way. You don't get along with somebody. That's it. It's over. And they're on to the next one. And I don't care how much they have to pay you out. They will pay you to sit on the sidelines in television more than in any other business. You can get paid to do nothing for a year and like it. That's what they did to Rachel Nichols. They paid her to sit on the bench. That's what they did with Michelle Beadle. Paid her to sit on the bench. And it happens over and over, not just to women, but to men too. But I'm happy for Rachel. She's talented. She's good at what she does. I don't think she stated very artfully what she said in a private conversation with Adam Mendelson, but at the same time, she probably never thought that conversation with Adam Mendelson would ever be heard anywhere. And I've got news for you on something. What she said in that conversation about diversity hires is something that's been said around the industry forever. She's not the only one that said it. I'm not going to say who I've heard say it, but I can promise you, if I said the names of the people that said it, they'd probably be cringing right now. Because I've talked to plenty of people, big name people, that have said the same thing that she said. She just got caught. And that's because somebody wanted her to get caught and be eliminated from that ESPN position. Again, that's not opinion. That's fact from having worked around this industry for, well, too long. 1-800-224-2004, 1-800-224-2004. You could tweet at the show, at the back page, on Twitter, at the back page. I should write a book. I really should. Problem is, if I wrote a book, nobody would ever want to be friends with me again. Which in some cases, some people may not want to be friends with me anyway. There's some NFL injury news I want to get to coming up here in a couple minutes. We'll do that to wrap up the hour. As I said, in the next hour, we'll talk a little bit more about the Tua Tagovailoa injury. We'll get into the big college football matchups for week 5. 2 big games that I want to get into. We'll do that coming up in a few minutes as well. The Canucks. Not a good time to be part of the Vancouver Canucks organization. I'll explain why. And for once, I agree with Kurt Schilling. Plus, we'll have Paige's picks in the next hour. I stunk it up last week. I was 1-3. We can only go up from there. I'm 7 in season. We'll do better this week, I promise. Stay with us. I'm Jason Page. It's the Cash In. Glad to have you with us on Sports Map Radio. Yeah, I said break. You didn't hear me? Were you listening? Because I said, I gave you the out cue. It was the same one I always use. What happened? Did you fall asleep? Oy vey. I said, coming back on Sports Map Radio. Oy vey. Don't do that when we're on in our new affiliate. Are you sure? It's Jason Page with you on this Friday night edition. Almost Saturday on the East Coast. All our wishes going out to our friends in Florida and South Carolina that have been ravaged by Hurricane Ian. It made landfall a couple of days ago in Southwest Florida. Then it made a second landfall over in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And we're hoping the best for you guys, really. I have a friend who lives in Fort Myers who told me today he's going to be without electricity for at least a week. Luckily, his home only sustained minor damage and had some trees down, but everybody's alive, and that's the one thing you cannot replace. So to everybody down there, we're all thinking of you, and hopefully brighter days are ahead. They're going to play the Buccaneers game against the Chiefs on Sunday night in Tampa Bay. That game, there had been some thought about moving it to Minneapolis. That did not happen. And instead, they will play the game in Tampa on Sunday night. And Tom Brady said he's hopeful that there can be some type of healing as a result of them playing that game. I'm not sure how much that really holds in a situation like this, because there's just so many people that are hurting right now. So, big injury news. There will be no Brian Hoyer this weekend for the, I should say there'll be no Mac Jones this weekend. There will be Brian Hoyer this weekend when the Patriots are back out on the football field to play a game. There will be no Mac Jones. The high ankle sprain, obviously too much in terms of an issue for him. So it'll be Brian Hoyer at quarterback in Lambeau Field against the Packers on Sunday afternoon in the late window. Hint, hint. Not a lot of points are going to be scored in that game. And right now the line is Packers minus 9.5. And I got to tell you, I'm not normally a fan of big spreads. Unless I'm the team getting the points, this might be the 1 week where you have to consider taking the Packers minus 9.5, because if they had trouble scoring points with Mac Jones at quarterback, what do you think's going to happen when Brian Hoyer's under center? Just saying. We'll do Page's picks coming up just under an hour from now. You'll want to stick around for that. Another hour, the final hour this week of the Cash In, is right around the corner on Sports Map Radio and the Sports Map Radio app. Stay with us. What? Yes, and I want you to stop clanging the spoon. It's like... hour of a Friday night / Saturday show. Hi there. Thanks for being with us. Whether you're listening to us on one of our Sports Map Radio affiliates, whether you're listening on the Sports Map Radio app, whether you're watching us on YouTube, the Decibel 88 channel, that's my media company, whether you're watching on the Decibel 88 Facebook channel, on my Facebook page, The Jason Page, on Twitch, Jason Page 77, on Twitter, at The Back Page. You got no excuses. Everywhere you are, I am. So, if you're not listening, hopefully you're watching. If you're not watching, hopefully you're listening. Glad to have you with us tonight. We've spent a lot of time on the Tua Tagovailoa injury. We've also gotten into the Ime Udoka developments in that story. Supposedly some unseemly text messages that he sent to a subordinate who he would later wind up in a relationship with. That is the source of the Celtics' disdain and their anger towards the situation and suspending him for a year. And it kind of gives us a little bit of a window into what's going on. The drip, drip, drip of information in that story continues. Big night in baseball. Aaron Judge did not hit home run number 62, and the Yankees lost to the Orioles. But it should be mentioned, another team in New York lost, and it was a big loss. The Mets fall to the Braves 5-2, and the Braves and Mets are now tied atop the National League East, and a lot at stake there, including a potential matchup with the Dodgers coming up in the divisional round. The losing team. That's who they get. I don't think the Dodgers are going to be happy to see either of those teams, by the way. They don't want to play the Mets, and they don't want to play the Braves in a short series. All right, in this hour, we'll talk Clemson, North Carolina State, Bama, and Arkansas preview as well. Stick around. That's next on the Cash In on Sports Map Radio. Bum, ba, bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Bum ba bum ba dum ba bum bum bum. Continuing in this final hour of the cash-in, make sure to follow me on Twitter at the back page. By doing so, you're entered to win. Simple as that. We pick a winner every Wednesday for a to-be-determined prize. Got to listen on Wednesday if you want to see what it is. Also, you're going to want to make sure to listen on Monday night. We got some pretty cool news to announce on our Monday night show. I cannot hint at anything more than that. Our friends at Sports Map Radio say they will flog me repeatedly if I spill the beans, so I'm not allowed to. But you're going to want to listen Monday night. Pretty cool news to announce. So make sure to be there for that. 2 college football games I will be watching this weekend. I have not watched college football in depth. Obviously, I watch the highlight shows, catch all the information. By the way, anybody who tells you they watch everything is a liar. That would be somebody you don't want to listen to because they're lying, because nobody can watch everything. We all have lives. We all have different things we do. We have to kind of split our time amongst different sporting events. I watch a lot, but I can't watch everything. Otherwise, I would be divorced. So 2 big games we're watching this weekend. Clemson and North Carolina State. NC State, go Wolfpack. Alabama and Arkansas. We talked a little bit about Alabama and Arkansas with Bill Bender the other night from the Sporting News. And it is an intriguing matchup. Yeah, I mean, Arkansas put up a ton of points last year against Alabama. Now, they gave up a ton of points, which is why they're unable to win. But I would not sleep on Arkansas in this game. I mean, Alabama's going to have to do some things defensively in order to be able to win. They've got to try and slow down the rushing attack, and you have to think that's Nick Saban's plan. You know, a la Bill Belichick. You have to think that Nick Saban's going to say, if Arkansas is going to beat us, they're going to have to do it through the air. They're going to stack the box. They're going to do everything they can to keep Arkansas from being able to run the football. Rocket Sanders, KJ Jefferson, there'll be a spy on him all game. And so far, those 2 guys have combined to rush for 782 yards this season. Oh, and they have 7 of the 17 touchdowns that Arkansas has scored as well. So if you're talking about an Arkansas win, either they're going to have to figure out a way to get those guys into space creatively, or it's going to be a big problem. I mean, last year, Arkansas had just 110 rushing yards in that game on 42 carries. I mean, that's 2.6 yards per carry. That's not Arkansas's recipe to win. And if they have to win the game through the air, Alabama's going to win this game. And again, it's slowing down KJ Jefferson, not allowing him to break containment. And I think that's what you're going to want to watch early on. And that's on Pete Golding. But again, they did it last year. You'd have to think they can do it again. 42-35 was the final when these 2 teams met last year. So that's one of the 2 games that I'll be watching in college football. As a matter of fact, I told my partner, I said, every weekend we've been running around doing something. I said, I need a weekend where we could just stay in and do nothing. And by that, I mean, I need to be able to stay in for a weekend and watch sports. That's what I really mean. Because there's so much to watch this weekend. The college football, the Aaron Judge home run chase, the Mets and the Braves, NFL on Sunday. I gotta be able to hang out at home and watch it all. Can't do that if we're out going to yard sales or brunch with the friends on Sunday morning, because out here football starts at 10 a.m. Makes brunch very difficult. So Clemson and NC State in Death Valley this Saturday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And, I mean, Clemson hasn't lost there in, 36 games, something like that? And that's kind of problematic. If you're trying to find a recipe for North Carolina, for North Carolina State, it's harder for me to make the argument for them than it is for me to make the argument for Clemson. I could come up with the reasons why I think Clemson wins this game. And again, it's in one regard, it's very similar to Alabama's recipe, and that is stop the rushing attack. That's what Clemson's going to have to be able to do. I mean, NC State is also a team, and that's, and this is a problem for Clemson. Clemson now is averaging 6.3 penalties per game on just the defensive side of the ball. You cannot make those kinds of mistakes in these sorts of games. I don't care if you're at home or not. The problem is NC State also averages a high number of penalties. So you're going to see a lot of laundry on the field this weekend. A lot of laundry on the field. I think Clemson wins. Of the two games, and I'll watch them both, but of the two games, I think the Alabama-Arkansas matchup is far more appealing. And you know what? I'll give Arkansas a chance. Especially at home, fired up environment. It's going to be loud. I'll give Arkansas a chance. I haven't looked at the lines on those, and considering we're a show that focuses our attention on gambling, you would think I would actually have a better idea of what the line is. I'll look it up real quick here before we move on to a couple other things that I want to get to. Alabama, whoa, nitty. Alabama, let's see here. I'm going to guess it's Alabama -7, but I want to have the exact line. Alabama, forget 7. God, I'm way off. Alabama -17.5. I will take that 17.5. So here's a bonus pick for Paige's Picks. I won't include it in the ones I do at the end of the show, or maybe I'll make sure to mention it then. But I'll give you a bonus pick. Take Arkansas plus 17.5. If anybody knows anything about me, it's this. I've got a penchant for home underdogs. And when you tell me home underdog to the tune of 17.5 that only lost to the same Alabama team by 7 points last year, sign me up. I will take Arkansas plus the 17.5. I can make an argument for Arkansas. A lot harder to do when it comes to Clemson, though. Or I should say NC State. And I know it's, only Clemson -6.5. But I think Clemson covers. I'm not doing that as one of Paige's picks, by the way. But I do think Clemson covers. I don't think Alabama covers. And look, we've seen them in a very similar spot this season on the road in Texas. And granted, that was earlier in the season. And yes, I know Alabama had 100 yards worth of penalties in that game. But I don't think Alabama is infallible. I really don't. And look, they can lose a game this season and still wind up playing in the college football playoff championship game, and that's all still possible. They could still wind up winning the whole thing and being fallible, but I know people are high on Clemson, but 6.5, I think they cover that. I don't think Alabama covers. I do think Clemson will. 1-800-224-2004. You got a thought on either of those two games? 800-224-2004. You can tweet at the show. Do so at the back page. Again, on Twitter, at the back page. I've got a story when we continue. It's one of those stories that I'd rather not talk about on a Friday night as we're all getting ready to party for the weekend and go out and enjoy our loved ones. there's one professional athlete that will not be doing that this weekend. And his story will make you think twice about the Tua Tagovailoa story. I'll explain what I'm talking about next on The Cash In. I'm Jason Page. It's Sports Map Radio. Austin, you remember the NFL music at the end of the show with Page's picks and all that? Okay, thanks. They should be in trouble for that, by the way. I don't know if that's the smartest thing to do with a promo. Seriously. That is not the smartest thing to do. We live in different times. All right, coming up in about 20 minutes, Friday edition, Week 4 edition of Pages. Picks. Can't wait. A little harder this week, though. And see, here's just the thing. Last week, I felt like I had 4 great picks, and I went 1-3. And the week you think you're not going to have good picks is the week you go 3-1. So I don't know where we're going this week. I got the games picked. I've done my homework, made my list. I checked it twice. We'll see how I do coming up in a few minutes. Page's picks here on the Cash In. All right, let me get through rapid fire on a few stories of import. Story you may not have heard about because it's boxing and it's not one of the big names that you would know about. But it's a story that I think relates to this Tua Tagovailoa story. We watched him get taken off the field, shaken up, fallen down, disoriented Sunday. Came back on the field, beat Buffalo. And everybody was saying hooray. And then we saw what happened last night in that shocking moment on the field where he was curled up and his fingers couldn't move and locked up. And then we all heard the post game, and we've all sort of seen what's happened since. I want to tell you about Luis Quinones, 25-year-old boxer, hailed from Colombia. According to ESPN, he died last night, 5 days after he was hospitalized following a knockout loss. Fight was in Colombia. He came in undefeated. They were in a back and forth until the 8th round. Quinones was knocked down by a punch after showing wobbly legs. He was reportedly taken out of the ring via stretcher. By Thursday, he was brain dead. And that's boxing, a sport which has as stringent a policy on these sorts of things as possible. They couldn't protect this kid. He died. And you know, I heard the story today about how Tua was watching McGruber on the flight home. He talked with his head coach. And everybody's going to, say, well, he put out a statement on Twitter and he's fine. Even though Mike McDaniels even acknowledged today that Tua was feeling the effects of the injury he sustained last night. But if there's any reason at all, and I said this in the last hour, why what happens next is as important as anything that's already happened in this story. Why whatever happens next is so crucial. And when you hear the story of this 25-year-old whose life is just starting, his idol was Julio Cesar Chavez. He was undefeated, went into this fight. You think he thought he was going to be fighting his last fight? That he'd wind up dead 5 days later? Tua Tagovailoa is going to wind up back on the football field probably at some point, barring some turn in this story that we have yet to hear about. And I'm sure that Luis Quinones, in the course of his life, the 25 short years he lived on this earth, took a lot of shots to the head. And the cumulative effect of that, you never know when the next one's going to be the last one. But how do you know that in the case of Tua? How many times was he hit in high school? How many times was he hit in Alabama? How many real concussions has he suffered during that time? Well, they say he's only suffered 3 now in the NFL. But how do we know it isn't more? How do you know when the next one doesn't turn out the lights for good? I don't think Luis Quinones went into the ring 5 days ago thinking he could wind up dead. Nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. And as fans, we've taken it for granted that it's not going to happen on the football field because it never really has. But with athletes as big, strong, fast as these athletes are, and the ferocity with which this game is played, how long is it before we have a Luis Quinones on a professional football field on a Sunday on national television with 10, 13, 15 million people watching? It's bound to happen. I don't want it to happen, but it's bound to happen at some point. And hopefully it's not sooner and it's later. Hopefully it's not at all. But it's certainly something that when you watch the way the game is played and you watched that moment last night with Tua, he may have left the field on a stretcher. He could have died hours later. Who knows? And again, think about it if you're his family, you're his loved ones, his friends. You're watching that moment. You could have watched that man die on a football field last night. And today we'd be asking whether or not it should have happened or it could have been prevented. And inevitably, when a football player dies on the field, and it will happen, Don't want it to, but it will. We will be asking these same exact questions again. All right. There is... How this story is flying under the radar is unbeknownst to me. But it is. So, and I only heard about it because I happened to turn on the TV at the right time in the 1 minute that it was discussed. The Vancouver Canucks owner, Francesco Aquilini. Francesco Aquilini is the owner of the Vancouver Canucks. And this week, the NHL became aware of allegations made in family court in Vancouver involving Aquilini. These allegations, heard by British Columbia Supreme Court Tuesday, came to light during a hearing that surrounded whether Aquilini is obliged to continue paying child support and covering university expenses for 3 of his children. According to the CBC, reporting on the story, the allegations claim Aquilini beat a sleeping child and threw a 5-year-old across the room. He's denying the allegations. According to the Vancouver Sun, the 3 children desire to no longer have any contact with their father. All 3 still live with their mother, and at ages 20, 22, and 24 are attending post-secondary in various programs. Talia Aquilini's lawyer, Claire Hunter, said each of the children disclosed physical and psychological abuse to their mother, though many of the specifics weren't revealed until after the separation. Names of the children, the schools they attend, and other personal information, according to CBC, have been redacted at the children's request. The NHL says, hey, we're looking into it. Now, keep in mind what we've just witnessed in the NBA, both with Ime Udoka, Robert Sarver, the now, soon-to-be former owner of the Phoenix Suns. And then you hear a story like this. I mean, does the NHL have any other options? And look, I'm not saying Aquilini is guilty of what he's done, and I'm not saying the children made it up, but I am saying the NHL had better damn well do its due diligence in how they investigate this. Because right now it's not being covered enormously, and again, it's north of the border, so sports radio in this country is probably not going to cover it a lot, especially because it's hockey, and I can tell you as somebody who worked for 2 different major sports media companies, one being ESPN and one being NBC, and even when those networks had hockey, they told me don't talk about hockey. So I can tell you right now, most sports radio outlets are not going to discuss this story. And I don't even know how much we'll talk about it. But I think it's important enough that it be mentioned, even if it is 12:35 p.m. Eastern, 9:35 on the West Coast, where Vancouver is. But it has to be discussed. Aquilini's legal team put out a statement saying he categorically denies and is outraged by the allegations. Couple divorced back in 2013. NHL has to tread very carefully, though, in terms of how they handle these sort of allegations in a story like this, when you consider, the nature of the allegations and the people involved. And before anybody says, well, now they're just saying it, 2022 and 24, they're looking for a money grab. There are many times where instances of abuse are not revealed until well after the fact. And I say that as a person that was a victim of abuse as a child. So, and that's not anything I haven't revealed before, so don't worry. You're not getting some scoop here on the show. All right, Paige's picks and how I agree with Kurt Schilling. Boy, that's one way to wrap up the show. We'll do it next on Sports Map Radio. and Seattle's going to the playoffs. The final score, 2-1 over the Mariners. By the way, A's this year, 101 losses, 56 and 101. Seattle at 86 and 70 is headed back to the postseason. So we've got our three wild card teams in the American League now. It is set as far as who will be going to the playoffs. We just don't know who's going to be playing against the Indians in the wild card round yet, and then the other two teams that will remain to play against each other. But the three wild card teams are set: Toronto, Seattle, Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay also clinching their spot tonight with a win on the road in Houston. And I'll tell you, all three of these wild card teams are going to be a lot of fun to watch. Hopefully Julio Rodriguez is healthy in time for the start of that wild card series. He had a back strain. He's going to be critical if you're talking about Seattle trying to make any sort of run in this postseason. He's been so good this year, the likely Rookie of the Year candidate. Bobby Witt Jr. will probably be a close second. What has not yet been decided is the three wild card teams. Two of them have, but one of them has not. The wild card race out in the National League has not crystallized just yet. Philadelphia was a winner earlier today, 5-1 against Washington. And the Brewers were a winner earlier, 1-0 against Miami. Philadelphia and Washington were supposed to play a doubleheader. They couldn't get both games in. So I suspect I don't know, with all the weather heading up towards the nation's capital, I don't know how they're going to get all these games in. But Washington and Philadelphia were postponed as far as the doubleheader was concerned. So right now the Brewers are one game out as far as the National League wild card is concerned. They are one game behind the Phillies. The Padres are all but in. They're 2 games clear of Philadelphia. Atlanta or the Mets will be the other wild card. Right now, it's about the Phillies and the Brewers. Brewers 1 game behind the Phillies for that National League wild card spot. Brewers have played a lot better of late. The Phillies have kind of fallen apart. Both of those would be interesting storylines, and we'll see which way it goes here over the final few days of the baseball season. But still some business to be decided in the American League with who is going to play against who. Again, the lowest of the 3 wild cards in the American League, which right now is the Tampa Bay Rays. They will get the Indians. And the other 2 teams will play against each other. I believe that's how it works, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll have to wait and see what happens here over the final few days of the baseball season. Aaron Judge went for home run number 62 tonight. It did not happen. He did have a base hit. He still trails Luis Ariz in the batting race, I think by a point, if I'm not mistaken. Yankees lose to the Orioles 2-1, but let not your heart be troubled. They are still very much the number 2 seed. The Houston Astros will be the 1 seed, and we're all set as far as the division winners are concerned in the American League. Houston with 102 wins, the Yankees at 96. Yankees need to go 4-2 over their final 6 games for a 100-win season, which if you were listening to the show a couple of weeks ago, Vlad and I had a rather heated debate about, and I said the Yankees would win 100 games. He said they would not. I will stick to my guns. The Yankees will win 100 games, especially when you consider their final games of the season will be played against the Texas Rangers, for what that's worth. 1-800-224-2004 is the telephone number, 800-224-2004. While we're on baseball, I'm going to do something that you'll probably never hear me do again, especially because he blocks me on Twitter because he's a bit of a snowflake. Kurt Schilling said something I agree with. He also said something I disagree with in the very same article that I was reading. But Curt Schilling said something that yours truly agrees with. He believes that Aaron Judge is the real home run champion, real home run king, if he gets to number 62. Appearing on Outkicks Don't At Me with Dan Dakich, who's quite the character. We'll just leave it at that. Schilling said the use of PEDs, or the suspected use of PEDs by guys like Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire, and Sammy Sosa, which is keeping them out of the Hall of Fame. He believes that makes Aaron Judge, should he get to 62 home runs, the real home run king. Quote, I don't recognize anything that Sammy or Barry did knowing full well they had cheated. I don't recognize any of that. That's just personal, Schilling said. To me, that's how I view it. The same reason why I wouldn't vote for anybody that I knew did steroids for the Hall of Fame. I just wouldn't do it. Doesn't mean they don't belong. Doesn't mean they aren't a Hall of Famer. Just means I wouldn't do it. I look at this as Judge tied the all-time record. As of today, there's nothing around him or surrounding him where we're discussing about Andros Dion in his locker or a relationship with Balco or a personal trainer. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but don't go to sleep on the fact that this guy's having one of the greatest offensive seasons in the history, short of Bond's stuff. His OPS is what some guy coming out of spring training who no one knows has at the end of April, and he fades off as a 250 hitter and goes back to AAA. Now, what he said that I disagree with is this. Shohei Ohtani, he believes, should be the American League MVP. If baseball wants to do a most outstanding player award, I'd say give it to Shohei Ohtani. But if we're talking most valuable player, there's no choice. It's Aaron Judge, and Aaron Judge. Let's get to Paige's picks. Yes, there it is. 4 winners for you. Actually, I've got 5 winners for you this week. 5 winners for you. Got a bonus pick. Game 1. In the UK, let's go across the pond, shall we? Vikings and Saints, 41.5 is the number. No Michael Thomas. No Jameis Winston in all likelihood. No points being scored. The Vikings are pretty good defensively, as are the Saints. The trip overseas, you going to be at your best? Under 41.5 is an easy pick on this one. Game number 1. Game number 2. I'm all about the unders, man. What is going on with me? Eric Casillas has, possessed my body. Giants and the Bears. Have you watched these two teams? If they had set the under at 35.5, I might have still taken the under. The Giants can't score, especially in the red zone. The Bears can't score anywhere. Both of the defenses are pretty good. Is there any doubt? I don't need any metrics or any special numbers, and when the moon rises on a certain side of the earth and blah, blah, blah. This is easy. If you've watched the first 4 weeks or first 3 weeks of this NFL season, 39.5 is not a lot of points. I get it. But 17-6, 20-10, most likely the final here. Under 39.5 is the pick, and it's pretty darn easy. Game number 2. Number 3. The Cowboys are home. Cooper Rush is the starting quarterback. It's the Cowboys and the Commanders. I still can't get used to saying that. I have a hard time figuring this out. Dallas is -3. They're way better, even with Cooper Rush at quarterback, who does not make a lot of mistakes. And the only chance the Commanders have in this game is if he makes mistakes. You get the sense that Dallas is figuring out in the running game. I know he had a drop last week, and I'm the first one to make fun of him, but the Cowboys are better at virtually every position. -3 at home is not a lot to ask. It's not heavy lifting for Dallas. The Cowboys are going to be 3-1, and Cooper Rush is going to be undefeated as their starting quarterback. And boy, we're going to be talking about a quarterback controversy in Dallas come next week. Dallas -3 at home against the Commanders. Game number 4, final NFL game for us to pick. It's another under. The Steelers and the Jets, under 41.5. Mitchell Trubisky, Joe Flacco. Oh, no Joe Flacco. It's Zach Wilson. Even better if you like the under. Steelers and Jets under 41.5 is a breeze. So we've got the Vikings and Saints under 41.5. The Giants and Bears under 39.5. Dallas -3 at home against the Commanders. The Steelers and Jets under 41.5. Your 4 NFL picks. And don't forget the bonus pick. I mentioned it earlier in the hour. Arkansas +17.5 at home against Alabama. Your 5 picks, Paige's picks. Week 4 in the NFL, Week 5 in college football. We'll wrap up this episode, this Friday edition of the Cash In on Sports Map Radio next. Hey, Baba Dukes. All right. Getting set to put the wraps on another week of the cash-in. If you're not following me on Twitter, make sure to do it at the back page. Why? We give away cool stuff to our Twitter followers every Wednesday on the show. You got to be following me, though. Go to Twitter at the back page. Follow me there. Send me a note. You're entered to win. Simple as that. We got a big announcement coming up next Monday night on our Monday edition of the Cash-In. We'll have a complete recap of all things Week 4 in the NFL, any of the latest information as it relates to the Tua Tagovailoa injury. Hopefully a happy recap on my Week 4 edition of Page's Picks. Again, we gave you 5 of them. The bonus pick, Arkansas plus 17.5. Believing big in the Razorbacks this week. Wouldn't be surprised if they figured out a way to win this game. But just take them with the 17.5. Better to be safe than sorry. But a big announcement coming Monday night. Looking forward to telling you all about that. And what should be an interesting weekend in sports. Mets trying to hold off the Braves. Braves trying to sneak in and get that NL East title, which will push the Mets into a wild card series and a potential divisional round series matchup against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Again, either of those matchups, whether it's Braves-Dodgers or Mets-Dodgers, are going to be a lot of fun to watch in the divisional round, assuming they get through the wild card round, which obviously is not a foregone conclusion. We'll also be keeping an eye on Aaron Judge all weekend. Does he get that 60-second home run? And will the Yankees and Orioles be able to get the games in? And if they don't, do they even wind up playing those games because the Orioles are eliminated from postseason contention and the Yankees' spot as the second seed is already sewn up? So it's a bit of a mess. Then the Yankees get the Rangers on the road next week. That's going to do it for me. Thanks to executive producer Vlad, Austin, and Houston. I'm Jason Page. We'll catch you next week on the Cash In on Sports Map Radio. Bye! All right, you know what you're doing for the podcast? Those 3 segments I told you? You know what? Can you throw in? Is it possible for you to just cut out and put Page's Picks in there? Can you do that? I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great weekend, Austin. Stay safe. All right, be well. Bye-bye. For those of you watching on the stream, I'm not going to belabor this. I'm just going to say goodbye because it's Friday and I want the weekend to start. Everybody have a great weekend. Look for me on Twitter at the back page. We'll have Page's Picks on Sunday morning on all of my social media platforms as well. But until I talk to you guys on Sunday, have a great weekend. Enjoy the college football. Enjoy the baseball. Still a lot of playoff races to be decided. I'll see you Sunday, and then we'll catch you back here on Monday for the Cash In. See ya.